So this is the HP Omen 15. It's one of the most requested gaming laptops that you guys asked us to check out, aside from the Lenovo Legion 5. But I finally have one. They actually shipped it to us right before the holidays, so yes, I am a bit late to the party, but I'm just gonna check it out anyways. You see, last year was interesting for computer hardware, especially when it comes to availability for AMD laptops. But stock is improving and you can actually buy this one right now, which is crazy considering it's been almost a year since AMD announced the Ryzen 4000H series of processors. Now, CES is usually the time when AMD announces new laptop CPUs, and if this year follows what happened last year, that means in March we'll be getting more details, new design rollouts in April or May, and then availability would be sort of like sometime later in the year. But I don't think it's gonna get any better than last time, because if you think about it, Ryzen CPUs, console SoCs, EPYC, Threadripper processors, even Radeon GPUs will still be fighting for TSMC's limited capacity. Guess it's exactly what happens when you decide to put all your eggs in one basket. But anyways, today we're here to discuss the Omen 15, and I think this might be the perfect option from a price to performance standpoint, plus you get a few other cool features as well. But as always, there are certain things that you need to be aware of, so let's dive in right after this.
Well, look what we have here, the new Fractal Design Meshify 2. No crazy surprises here, just a well thought out and functional case with a new swivel front door to easily remove a dust filter behind the school panel. 3 case fans are included with a fantastic top fan bracket for easy installation of anything outside the enclosure. USB-C adapters will appreciate the I/O, and the usual awesome user experience you get with the Fractal. Plus, zero frustration with cable management guaranteed. The Meshify 2, a proper airflow enclosure for your next build. Check it out below.
All right, so the first thing I want to get to is the price, because it's all over the place and there's a lot of variation in terms of specs from one region to another. So my sample comes with a Ryzen 7 4800H processor, 16 gigabytes of RAM, 512GB SSD, a GTX 1660 Ti, and a 1080p 144Hz display, and it's priced at $1,300. If you find it on sale, you'll probably save $50. Right now, I think this one strikes a really good balance of performance and price that doesn't completely break the bank. But there are a ton of other options that range all the way from a Ryzen 5 4600H with 8GB of memory and a GTX 1660 Ti for $1,000, all the way up to a 4800H with an RTX 2060 and a terabyte SSD. The only problem you'll probably have is finding the right model. Even on HP's official website, others are pretty rare, like the one with the 4800H, 16 gigabytes of memory, and an RTX 2060. Plus, secondary retailers like Amazon, Best Buy, and Costco don't leave out a lot of the information, or they just forget to leave most of the important information for you guys to make an informed decision. So that means leaving things like the display and the rest of the specs, which can lead to a terrible situation. Let's take a look at some examples, with the first ones being how region-specific models can really mess things up. First of all, on the HP Canada side, there's only a dozen of Omen laptops, and a lot of those are from their previous generation, and not a single one has an AMD CPU. But that doesn't mean you can't find a new Omen 15 with an AMD CPU. At first glance, this one looks like everything we'd want. It has the 4800H, 16GB of RAM, and a 512GB SSD, but other than the fact that it's used, this is a Canada-specific model that, according to HP's site, has a 60Hz display that covers only 65% of the sRGB color space. And it only has a max brightness of 250 nits. So buyers, please pay close attention, since this is happening in other countries too. Now, HP isn't the only company guilty of this, since Acer and Asus tend to do the same thing with having a lot of variations of the exact same model, but by far, this is the worst that we've come across. Either way, here's a little guidance. If the model number starts with 15EN0029, you'll get the exact one that we have in this review, whereas the 15EN0023 has the same specs, but a 1TB SSD. Now, if you see anything else, please let us know in the comments down below, because again, it is specific from region to region. So yeah, pretty confusing, right? All right, so I think that's the longest that I've spent talking about pricing and availability, but now let's get into the design of the Omen 15. I really like it, guys. First and foremost, the matte gray finish on the chassis is pretty unique, and it's consistent throughout the body. It also does a really nice job resisting fingerprints, which is a bonus. The diamond-shaped gradient thingy on the lid is a cool touch too. Most gaming laptops come with red and black accents, but this is sort of like a blue-green gradient depending on lighting conditions, and I think this is the one design aspect that makes it stand out from the rest. Other than that, everything else is pretty minimal. Build quality is alright, even though from the outside it may look like it's made out of aluminum, but in reality it isn't. The entire chassis is made out of plastic and it's put together pretty well, except for the fact that if you place your hands on the lid, it does tend to get a little too flexible, which might freak a lot of people out, but you don't have to worry about it because from my usage, it seems to be taking care, it just seems to handle just fine. Also, the hinge is pretty smooth and I barely noticed any wobble, and you can open the lid with one hand, which is nice. As for size, it's 22.6 millimeters thick and it weighs around 5.5 pounds, which isn't too bad to lug around. And the size of the power brick is pretty standard for a gaming laptop. It's pretty heavy, but not as bad as Lenovo's Legion series. The interior space is nice. You're not getting a full-size keyboard, but rather a standard one with function keys, kind of like TKL keyboards. There are a couple of shortcut keys, like one for HP's gaming hub and one for calculator. The power button placement is questionable, right in between the F12 and delete key. I don't know who thought that would be a good idea, but it just doesn't belong there. The keys themselves provide good feedback. There's an adequate amount of travel distance and they're spaced out pretty well. They're also very stable, which is always appreciated. I really enjoyed my time typing and gaming on this laptop. It's also backlit, and the sample that I have over here does not feature RGB lighting, but there are some models out there that do. It's bright enough for darker environments, and the lighting consistency across these keys are top notch, thanks to the micro LEDs underneath. The trackpad is decent. I'm not a huge fan of the texture though, since it is a bit too rough for my liking. That being said, it gets the job done and it supports Windows gestures. Also, the primary integrated left and right buttons, they are okay, but I do have to mention that one of them sounds different than the other, or sounds a bit mushier than the other. I'm pretty sure it has to do with my sample, but here's a quick demo. This is the webcam test on the Omen 15, and the quality it's all right. As you can see, it does tend to overexpose my forehead and just a bunch of other areas, too high. So just watch out for that. But it should get you through some meetings just fine. What did surprise me was the microphone quality, because it actually sounds a lot better than some of the other gaming laptops that I've looked at, because it cuts out a lot of the background noise. It sounds pretty good. I'm actually, really impressed, especially at this price point. But again, keep your expectations low, because this is a gaming laptop, and I don't think a lot of people value webcams in the first place. So yeah. The speakers are located at the bottom, so naturally keep your expectations low. They don't sound that great. In fact, I did notice distortions at max volume with the trebles. Bass is pretty much non-existent. Honestly, don't fall for the fact that these are tuned by Bang & Olufsen, because I think that it's just a marketing gimmick. Moving on to the display, HP has equipped the Omen 15 with a 1080p 144Hz IPS panel, and I was really surprised by the color reproduction, especially for the price. As you can see, it covers 98% sRGB, 73% Adobe RGB, and 74% DCI-P3, which is something that I did not expect for an AMD-based gaming laptop, because all the other laptops that I've looked at featuring Ryzen CPUs have cut corners on the display department, but HP didn't. So you can comfortably use this to edit photos and videos, which is awesome. Keep in mind that the screen doesn't get too bright, especially because this is only 300 nits, and it's not necessarily that bright, especially when compared to the more content creator based laptops that reach 500 nits. So yeah, keep those expectations low. Also, the 144 Hz refresh rate is just an awesome thing to have, because when you're gaming, it comes in so clutch, and you're getting a really good quality display. So the colors really do pop. Honestly, you are in for a treat when you're gaming on this thing, and I'm surprised that you're getting such an amazing screen for this price point. It's really awesome. Port selection is well thought out on the Omen 15. On the left-hand side, you get power in, RJ45, USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A, HDMI 2.0, audio jack, a full-size SD card reader. Keep in mind that it's UHS 1. Switching over to the right, you get a couple more USB Type A ports, a mini display port, and a USB Type-C, which also supports DisplayPort 1.4. I do want to mention that all of these USB ports are Gen 1 5 gigabits per second, which is unfortunate. I would have preferred it to be 10 gigabits per second, but I guess that's one area that they had to cut down for the price, so yeah, just keep that in mind. In terms of upgradability, the Omen 15 is really flexible. As you can see, you get instant access to the memory modules, the primary NVMe SSD is right over here, and the user has the option to add another M.2 drive right over here, which is awesome. The drive speeds are really fast. I got around 3.5 gigabytes per second on read and 2.9 gigabytes per second on write performance. Battery life on the Omen 15's default mode is pretty good, and it's about what we'd come to expect from an AMD laptop with a 70 watt-hour battery. With a few small changes like lowering screen brightness even more, and of course making sure that there aren't any power-hungry apps running in the background, you could get a full workday of light use on a single charge. At heavier loads, overall battery life suffers, of course, but that's to be expected. While we don't recommend the tough A15 as an alternative, it's actually amazing to see what happens when you pair these AMD CPUs with a much larger battery. Now moving on to software side of things, like every other gaming laptop, this one includes Omen's own take on controller software with their gaming hub. The My Games tab allows you to launch whatever titles on your computer, but it's pretty much pointless since you'll still need to log in through whatever service that game requires. Light Studio is an all-in-one RGB controller for the keyboard backlighting, but you need to first download it from the Windows Store, which is really odd. Now there is something that I want to point out, and that is something that you might have run into if you picked up the Omen 15. You see, if you go into Light Studio and if you can't necessarily customize lighting effects, you might have actually picked the model with just pure white backlighting, because there are models out there, as I mentioned earlier, with RGB and non-RGB, and according to HP, they actually don't make it very clear on the website which one does come with RGB and which one does not, which is, I think someone needs to figure that out because it's super confusing. I thought that my sample came with RGB lighting, so I had to spend just hours troubleshooting to see why I couldn't get it to work, but then I realized that I don't have it, so yeah. There's that. Anyways, moving on, Gallery actually houses a bunch of desktop wallpapers. Coaching uses the Mobalytics AI software to evaluate your performance in online games and then spits out recommendations on areas where you can improve, which is pretty cool. Remote play is an interesting concept since it technically allows you to stream gameplay to any device over Wi-Fi, but right now it feels like an early alpha app since there's a ton of lag and disconnections. Now, the Omen 15 tab at the bottom is where all the fun happens. If you go into the Performance Control tab, this is where the Omen 15's main system functions can be accessed. The System Vitals sections has information like utilization and temperatures for the CPU and GPU, along with memory information and network traffic stats. The Network Booster section is something I actually wish more companies would add to their laptops, since with it, you can prioritize or deprioritize which apps have the best access to your wireless network. It comes in really handy if you're working with limited bandwidth and want to make sure either a game or a download has the most resources. Finally, in Performance Control, you have the option to change between Comfort, Default, and Performance. There's also an option to increase fan speed to 100% regardless of the mode you're in. Now, you might think you've got these figured out, but don't go into thinking Comfort mode is the same as Silent on other laptops. It actually focuses on giving the lowest temperatures rather than the quietest experience. Let's dive a bit deeper into what you can expect from each, starting with how loud they are. Like I said, Comfort isn't actually that comfortable for your ears, and I think that HP is talking about the overall comfort for the components. It's actually just as noisy as running the fans at 100% all the time. As for Default and Performance, they're quieter overall, but let's see how this all translates into clock speeds and temperatures in rendering and gaming. From a CPU temperature perspective, you can see exactly when the comfort setting fan profile kicks into high gear and when it starts throttling back. Default allows temperatures to climb up to the 86-degree mark before the fan speed increases, and then it brings things back in line and settles just under 80 degrees. The performance mode is an interesting one, since even though HP claims it could lead to higher fan speeds and temperatures, it actually doesn't. Overall though, it looks like the cooling system on this laptop is really good. There's some interesting things going on here with clock speeds too. Both Performance and Default have basically the same speeds, with Performance hitting a constant 4.15 GHz on all cores, while Default is just a bit behind 100 MHz less. I should mention right now, both these speeds are the second highest we've seen from an AMD laptop, with the champion still being the Electronics RP15's Beast Mode. Now when you switch to Comfort, well, it starts off pretty strong around 3.8 GHz, but then midway through the rendering test, it took the foot off the gas and eventually stabilized around 3.6 GHz. But even after that point, there was a lot of movement throughout its clock speeds range. Now looking at power, I really have to wonder why HP decided to run the Omen 15 at full fan speed every now and then in comfort mode. I mean, it's limited to just 25 watts and temperatures were super low, so there's absolutely no reason for it. And with performance and default modes being so close on the clock speed side, it shouldn't come as a surprise. Performance rings in at 36 watts while default hits 34 watts. Moving on to the GPU side of things, the GTX 1660 Ti's temperatures are really well managed in every single mode, but I'll say it again, why even bother having the comfort mode run so cool? This GPU is completely fine at a constant 60 to 75 degrees, but instead, it's running closer to 57 while the fans blast your ears out. And all that noise doesn't even lead to higher clock speeds, with default, performance, and comfort all being within 50 MHz of one another. That means NVIDIA's boost algorithms are perfectly satisfied at a bit higher temperature too. NVIDIA's specs for the 1660 Ti's laptop version have it running around 80 watts, and that's exactly what the Omen 15 gets in every single mode. So it's not like HP's throttling it in any way, especially since the core clocks here are higher than NVIDIA's advertises as their boost frequency. Now at this point, I'm pretty sure you're wondering about the 100% fan speed setting that I talked about earlier. Well, it actually doesn't make any difference because the Omen 15's cooling system is more than good enough in its regular setting, so that means that results won't actually be limited by temperatures. In fact, the bottleneck is actually the amount of power HP is feeding into the Ryzen 7 4800H and the 1660 Ti. So giving it more cooling really won't do anything. And that actually reflects surface temperatures because, as you can see, it doesn't get that toasty, which makes sense because when the fans are at full speed, it does bring those temperatures down. And to be honest with you, you could technically game on your lap if you really want to, provided that you're okay with blasting out your ears with these fans, because it's really loud, guys. All right, so I think it's time to head into actual benchmarks with our real-world testing. As we head into these, it should become obvious that even though the Omen 15 doesn't have the highest peak clock speeds of the bunch, it consistently wins out at the end of the day, especially over the length of longer rendering tests. Moving on to GPU accelerated programs like Premiere Pro, it falls a bit behind other laptops that are rocking the RTX 2060, but it still puts up really strong results. We can say the same thing for Resolve, which also shows pretty good overall performance. Gaming was actually a bit of a surprise since this is the first Ryzen system we've tested with a GTX 1660 Ti. Overall, it's only between 10 to 15% slower than a standard RTX 2060, and at some points even less than that since some of the laptops in these charts aren't running their 2060s at full wattage. Meanwhile, the GPU inside this Omen 15 is hitting its peak power. Now, since the RTX 2060 can't even hit playable frame rates with RT on, the 1660 Ti seems like an excellent alternative from a value standpoint, at least on laptops. Alright, so here are my thoughts on the Omen 15 from HP. You see, just this past year, we've taken a look at a lot of gaming laptops, specifically laptops with AMD processors. And most of them were disappointing, but there were a few exceptions like the G14 and the Legion 5 from Lenovo. And I think I have to add the Omen 15 to that list because HP just got a lot of things right with this laptop. The first thing being the design. I really like the minimal, sort of clean aesthetic with this notebook. Also, the display is fantastic. Honestly, I did not expect a really good quality screen for this price point. The keyboard is excellent. I love how it feels. And the lighting is also very nice and consistent. Trackpad could be a little bit better, but you know, it is what it is. And the port selection is also really well thought out. I mean, you are getting an SD card reader, mini display port. I mean, this thing, it's honestly really impressive. But I have to mention that the model that we have over here is one of the good ones, and it offers a good blend of price to performance, but it's also a case of buyer beware because, you know, you could end up picking up the wrong model with a terrible display and also making some odd sacrifices. So really watch out for the model that you're getting because sometimes you could end up with a disappointment. And the fact that HP doesn't clearly state the actual sort of differentiation between RGB and non-RGB keyboards is also kind of frustrating. I really hope they actually sort of nail those things down. And also, it's unfortunate that there are just a variety of variations from region to region. So yeah, if you find the right model, this is great. But if you can't find one, then I don't know what to say. So on that note, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys were able to take something from this video, and also let us know what you guys think about the Omen 15, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Spend responsibly, my friends. Spend responsibly.